The Hollow Hours, a novel of nightmares. Chapter 1. The Jungle. The darkness came alive with hunger. Daniel Cole opened his eyes to a world that shouldn't exist, a cathedral of ancient trees that stretched impossibly high, their canopies swallowing whatever moon or stars might have offered salvation. The air hung thick and wet, coating his lungs with each desperate breath, tasting of rot and vegetation and something else, something primal, something watching. He was standing. That was wrong. He'd fallen asleep in his apartment, in his bed, the television murmuring late-night infomercials into the empty room. Now he stood barefoot on a carpet of decomposing leaves, wearing only the thin cotton t-shirt and boxers he'd worn to bed. The ground squished between his toes, cold and slick with moisture that might have been dew or might have been something far worse. "This is a dream," he told himself. "Just a dream. Wake up." But his heartbeat thundered too real in his chest. The bark of the nearest tree felt too rough against his palm. The mosquito that landed on his forearm and pierced his skin drew blood that welled up too red, too warm, too there. A sound cut through the jungle, a low, guttural clicking that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Daniel's blood turned to ice water. He pressed his back against the massive tree trunk, eyes scanning the impenetrable darkness. Bioluminescent fungi dotted the forest floor in patches, casting sickly blue-green light that created more shadows than it dispelled. The clicking grew closer, louder. It was accompanied by the soft whisper of something large moving through the underbrush, not crashing, not stumbling, but gliding with terrible purpose. Daniel saw the eyes first. They emerged from the darkness like twin embers, floating approximately 7 feet off the ground and burning with an amber luminescence that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the clicking sound. As his vision adjusted, he could make out the shape attached to those horrible eyes. A humanoid figure, but wrong in every way that mattered. Its limbs were too long, its joints bending at angles that made his stomach lurch. Its body was composed of living shadow, edges blurring and reforming like smoke given malevolent intent. The creature's head tilted, studying him with those burning eyes. The clicking intensified. Daniel realized with horror that it was coming from the thing's throat, some kind of echolocation. It was hunting him. His legs moved before his mind could process the command. Daniel bolted into the jungle, branches whipping his face, thorns tearing at his exposed skin. Behind him, the clicking transformed into a shriek, a sound so alien and filled with rage that his bowels nearly let go. "It's fast," his panicked mind registered as he heard the creature crashing through the vegetation behind him. "It's so goddamn fast." The jungle became a nightmare obstacle course. Roots rose like skeletal fingers to trip him. Vines dangled like nooses waiting to embrace him. Daniel's lungs burned. His feet bled from a dozen unseen wounds, but he ran, driven by an animal terror that transcended conscious thought. The creature was gaining. He could hear it, that clicking, 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 getting louder, closer. He could smell it now, a scent like copper and decay that seemed to precede it through the humid air. Daniel's foot caught on a root and he went sprawling. He hit the ground hard, the impact driving the breath from his lungs. For one terrible moment, he could only lie there, gasping like a landed fish, waiting for those long limbs to wrap around him, waiting for whatever passed for the creature's mouth to move. He rolled, and claws raked the earth where his chest had been a millisecond before. The creature shrieked again, those amber eyes blazing with frustration. In the dim, fungal glow, Daniel could see it more clearly now, a nightmare given form, its shadowy body rippling with barely contained violence. His hand closed around something, a fallen branch, thick and heavy with rot, but solid enough. As the creature lunged again, Daniel swung with every ounce of strength his terror could provide. The branch connected with the side of the creature's head, shattering upon impact, but sending the thing stumbling sideways with a screech of surprise. It can be hurt, Daniel realized. It's real enough to hurt. He scrambled to his feet and ran again, but this time his mind was working alongside his fear. He couldn't outrun this thing. He needed to outsmart it. Ahead, the fungi grew thicker, casting stronger light. Beyond that, he heard something. Water, rushing water. The creature recovered and gave chase, but it was more cautious now, that clicking taking on an almost questioning quality. Daniel pushed toward the water sound, bursting through a wall of ferns to find himself at the edge of a cliff overlooking a river that cut through the jungle below. The drop was maybe 30 feet, survivable, if the water was deep enough, if he hit it right, if he was lucky. The clicking was right behind him now. Daniel didn't hesitate. He jumped. The fall lasted forever and no time at all. He hit the water feet first, and the impact drove the breath from his lungs in an explosion of bubbles. The current grabbed him immediately, tumbling him through darkness and cold, and somewhere above the surface he heard that shriek of rage again, but it was fading, fading, fading. He broke the surface, gasping, and pulled himself onto a muddy bank. When he looked back, the cliff was empty. The clicking had stopped. Daniel lay in the mud, shivering despite the humid heat, and stared at the alien stars visible through a gap in the canopy. His heart was still racing. His body was a map of cuts and bruises. He was alive, somehow alive, but the question that kept circling through his exhausted mind was the worst terror of all. Where am I? What is this place? And why can't I wake up? The jungle offered no answers, only the distant sounds of creatures that might have been birds or might have been something far worse. Daniel closed his eyes, willing himself to return to reality, to his apartment, to safety. When he opened them again, he was in his bed. Morning light streamed through the windows, the television still muttered, now showing some cheerful morning news program. Daniel sat up slowly, his body stiff, his mind foggy. Just a dream, the most vivid dream of his life, but still just a dream. Then he looked at his feet. They were covered in scratches, crusted with dried blood. Between his toes he could see dark soil, jungle soil, decomposing leaves wedged under his toenails. Daniel began to scream. Chapter 2. The Ancient Temple. He didn't sleep for 2 days. Daniel tried everything: coffee, energy drinks, pacing his apartment until his neighbors pounded on the floor. He researched his symptoms obsessively, convincing himself it was sleep paralysis, lucid dreaming gone wrong, some form of somnambulism that could explain the dirt on his feet. But no explanation felt right. None of them captured the realness of what he'd experienced. By the third night, his body betrayed him. His eyelids grew heavy despite his terror. The television blurred. The couch seemed to embrace him like a living thing. No, he thought, please, no. But consciousness slipped away like water through desperate fingers. The smell hit him first, ancient stone and mold, incense long burned to ash, and beneath it all, the dusty sweetness of decay. Daniel's eyes snapped open to find himself standing in a vast chamber illuminated by shafts of moonlight falling through holes in a deteriorating ceiling. The walls were covered in carvings, figures in strange poses, symbols that hurt to look at, faces with too many eyes or not enough. An ancient temple, half reclaimed by the jungle that pressed against its crumbling exterior. Moss grew thick on every surface. Vines had invaded through cracks in the stingwork, creating a web of vegetation that seemed almost deliberate in its patterns. The floor beneath his bare feet was cold stone, slick with moisture, and something else, a thin layer of dust that his footprints marked with damning clarity. Not again, Daniel thought. Please, not again. But he was already here, wherever here was, and the only way out was through. He moved carefully, hyper-aware of his surroundings. The temple was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, each more unsettling than the last. In one room, he found an altar stained dark with substances he didn't want to identify. In another, mummified bodies lined the walls in alcoves, their faces preserved in expressions of peaceful acceptance that seemed wrong in a place like this. A sound echoed through the temple. Footsteps, but not quite. More like the whisper of fabric dragging across stone, accompanied by a low chanting in a language that had no right to exist. Daniel pressed himself into an alcove, his heart hammering so hard he was certain whatever was out there could hear it. The Guardian emerged from the darkness at the far end of the corridor. It had been human once, or at least it had taken human form as its vessel. A tall figure draped in ceremonial robes that had rotted to threads, exposing glimpses of translucent flesh through which Daniel could see the outline of bones and organs that glowed with a sickly inner light. Its face was a skull wrapped in papery skin, eye sockets blazing with cold blue fire. In its hands it carried a spear that seemed to be made of frozen moonlight, beautiful and terrible and utterly deadly. The Guardian's skull face turned toward his alcove. Daniel ran. The temple fought him at every turn. Passages ended in collapsed rubble. Doors refused to open, and always he could hear the Guardian behind him, that whispering chant, those not-quite footsteps, the hum of that spectral spear cutting through air that should have been too thick and stale to vibrate. A corridor opened onto a chamber filled with pillars. Daniel ducked behind one just as the Guardian entered, its blue eye flames scanning the shadows. The chanting had stopped. The temple was utterly silent except for Daniel's ragged breathing, which he tried desperately to muffle against his hand. The Guardian moved between the pillars with terrible patience, searching. Daniel could see now that it wasn't walking, it was floating, its feet dangling inches above the floor, those rotted robes trailing behind it like the train of some nightmarish wedding dress. It's dead, Daniel thought. It's dead, but it won't stop. It will never stop. He spotted something across the chamber, a mechanism of some kind, ancient gears and levers barely visible in the moonlight. A trap, perhaps, or the trigger for one. The temple was old enough, strange enough that it might still function. The Guardian was getting closer. He could feel the cold radiating from it, an unnatural chill that seemed to seep into his bones. He had seconds, maybe less. He grabbed a chunk of fallen masonry and hurled it to his left. The stone clattered across the floor, and the Guardian spun toward the sound with inhuman speed, that spectral spear already thrusting toward the disturbance. Daniel bolted for the mechanism. The Guardian shrieked, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, that resonated in Daniel's skull like a struck bell. He heard it behind him, felt that cold intensifying as it closed the distance. His hand clutched at a lever covered in verdigris and ancient dust. He pulled. The floor beneath the Guardian gave way with a grinding roar of ancient machinery. Stone slabs that had waited millennia for this moment retracted into hidden channels, revealing a pit that seemed to descend forever into absolute darkness. The Guardian scrabbled at the edge for one terrible moment, those blue eye flames fixed on Daniel with an expression that might have been rage or might have been something far more complex. Then it fell, and the chanting faded into the depths until only silence remained. Daniel didn't wait to see if it would return. He ran through the temple, navigating by instinct and desperation, until he burst through a doorway and found himself on a terrace overlooking the jungle. The moon hung fat and white above the canopy, and for a moment he just stood there, breathing, alive. 2 nights, he thought, 2 nightmares, 2 creatures trying to kill me. What happens on night 3? He woke in his apartment with dust on his hands and the smell of ancient incense in his nostrils. This time he didn't scream. He simply sat in his bed and stared at the wall and tried to prepare himself for whatever was coming next. Sleep, he was beginning to understand, had become the enemy.
Chapter 3. The Riverside. The fog came first. Daniel felt it before he saw it, a damp caress against his skin that made him shiver despite its warmth. He opened his eyes to find himself standing on a muddy bank beside a river that stretched into gray infinity on either side. The water moved sluggishly, almost reluctantly, its surface like dark glass reflecting a sky that held no sun, no moon, only an endless canopy of swirling mist. He was getting used to the transitions now, the jarring shift from his world to this, whatever this was. Purgatory, perhaps, some layer of reality that existed between sleeping and waking, where nightmares took physical form and hunted him like prey. The riverside was quiet, but it was the wrong kind of quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when everything alive has fled and only the predator remains. Daniel could hear the river lapping at the bank, could hear the fog swirling through reeds that grew thick along the water's edge, but there were no birds, no insects, no signs of life whatsoever. And then the whispering began. It came from the water, soft, insidious, impossible to ignore. Voices that seemed to speak directly into his mind, promising rest, promising peace, promising an end to the terror that had consumed his nights. All he had to do was step into the river, just one step. The water was warm, so warm, and the current would carry him somewhere safe. Daniel backed away from the bank, his hands pressed over his ears. The whispers didn't diminish. They were inside him now, worms of sound burrowing into his thoughts, trying to override his survival instincts with false comfort. It's a trap, he told himself. Whatever's out there, it's trying to lure me in. Something broke the surface of the river. At first, Daniel thought it was a log, dark and smooth, glistening in the gray light. Then it rose higher, and he saw the joints, the segments, the way it bent at impossible angles. An arm, but not an arm, a limb perhaps 20 feet long, skeletal and wrong, ending in a hand with fingers like the legs of a spider. Another limb emerged, then another. The water roiled as something vast began to surface, and the whispering crescendoed into a cacophony of voices, screaming for him to come, come, come to the water, come to us, we've been waiting so long. Daniel ran. The riverbank seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions, offering no escape, no shelter. Behind him he heard the creature fully emerge, a sound of cascading water and something like a sigh of satisfaction. The fog parted, and in his peripheral vision he caught glimpses of what pursued him, a body like a bloated spider made of drowned flesh, dozens of those impossibly long limbs propelling it across the mud with horrible speed, and at its center a face that might have once been human but had been stretched and distorted by eons underwater until only the hunger remained. One of those limbs shot past Daniel, slamming into the mud ahead of him. He ducked and rolled, feeling the displaced air as another limb swept over his head. The creature was faster than him, stronger than him. He couldn't escape through speed alone. Think,
he commanded himself. You survived the jungle. You survived the temple. Think. His eyes found what he needed, an old dock extending into the river, rotten and half-collapsed, but still standing. Beneath it, in the shallow water, he could see the skeletal remains of a rowboat, its hull pierced by rocks that jutted up through the riverbed. Daniel made a decision that went against every instinct in his body. Instead of running from the river, he ran toward it. The creature shrieked, a waterlogged, bubbling sound that made his skin crawl, and gave chase. Daniel splashed into the shallows, the water surprisingly warm against his ankles, then his knees, then his thighs. The whispers exploded in his head, welcoming him, celebrating his arrival. He grabbed the edge of the ruined rowboat and pulled himself under the dock, just as the creature's limbs came crashing down around him. The rocks, the sharp, jagged rocks that had destroyed the boat. The creature's limbs stabbed into the water, seeking him out, but in its frenzy, it impaled itself on those same rocks. Daniel heard the tearing sound, felt the thrashing as the creature tried to free itself. Thick black ichor leaked into the water around him, carrying with it a cold that seeped into his bones. He didn't wait. He scrambled out from under the dock on the opposite side, pulling himself onto the bank, and ran without looking back. Behind him, the creature's shrieks turned from rage to something that might have been pain. The fog thickened ahead of him, and Daniel plunged into it, hoping it would provide cover. He ran until his lungs burned, until his legs threatened to give out, until the shrieks faded into the gray silence behind him. When he finally stopped, he found himself in a clearing where the fog formed a perfect dome overhead, blocking out whatever sky existed in this place. In the center of the clearing stood a small cottage, ancient and decrepit, its windows dark and its door hanging askew on rusted hinges. No, Daniel thought, I'm not going in there. But the fog was closing in, and somewhere in its depths he could hear a new sound, wet, slithering, getting closer. The creature might be wounded, but it wasn't dead. Nothing in this place ever truly died. Daniel approached the cottage, his skin crawling with dread. The door creaked open at his touch, revealing darkness within. He stepped inside, and the world shifted. Chapter 4. The Abandoned Cottage. The door slammed shut behind him with a finality that made his heart stutter. Daniel spun, grasping for the handle, but there was no handle, only smooth, ancient wood that seemed to pulse beneath his palm like living tissue. The door wouldn't budge. He was trapped. The cottage's interior was larger than its exterior should have allowed. A single room stretched before him, filled with furniture draped in rotting sheets, shadows pooling in corners where no light should fail to reach, and the pervasive smell of dust and something sweet, sickly sweet, like flowers left too long in a vase. Moonlight. Where was there moonlight in that fog? Filtered through grimy windows, casting the room in shades of gray and silver. Daniel moved carefully, his bare feet making no sound on floors that might have been wood or might have been something organic. Every step felt like trespassing. Every breath felt like theft. A child's rocking horse sat in one corner, its painted eyes following him as he passed. Impossible, of course. Painted eyes couldn't move, but Daniel could have sworn they tracked his every movement. Near the cold fireplace, a collection of dolls lined a shelf, their porcelain faces cracked and their glass eyes catching the moonlight in ways that made them seem almost aware. Just get out, he told himself. Find another exit, a window, a back door, anything. He moved toward what he thought might be a kitchen area, stepping around a table set for a dinner that had never been served. The plates were covered in a thick layer of dust, but beneath it he could see the remains of food, where what had once been food, now mummified into unrecognizable shapes. Something scraped against the floor behind him. Daniel froze. The sound came again, a soft, deliberate scraping, like porcelain against wood. Slowly, terrified of what he might see, he turned. One of the dolls had moved. It sat at the edge of the shelf now, its legs dangling over the side, its head tilted at an angle that would have been coquettish on a living girl, but was obscene on this thing of cracked ceramic and faded silk. As Daniel watched, unable to move, unable to breathe, the doll's jointed arms rose, and its hands, small, perfect, terrifying, began to grasp the shelf's edge. It pulled itself forward and dropped to the floor with a soft thump. Then it began to walk toward him. The movement was wrong, jerky, like a marionette controlled by an inexperienced puppeteer. Its porcelain feet clicked on the floor in a rhythm that seemed almost gleeful. Behind it, he heard more sounds, more scraping, more thumps, more clicking, and he realized with mounting horror that all the dolls were moving now, all of them descending from their shelf, all of them converging on him. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no!" He ran for the kitchen, but something grabbed his ankle. He crashed to the floor, the impact driving the breath from his lungs, and when he looked back, he saw a doll clinging to his leg with strength that its tiny form shouldn't possess. Its mouth was open now, revealing teeth, not painted teeth, real teeth, tiny and sharp and too numerous, and it was climbing higher, reaching for his face. Daniel kicked, and the doll went flying, shattering against the far wall. But the others were coming, a tide of clicking porcelain and glittering glass eyes, and he scrambled backward until his back hit the counter. His hand closed around something, an old knife, its blade pitted with rust, but still sharp enough. He swung wildly as the first doll reached him, cleaving it in two. Sawdust and something dark leaked from the wound, and the doll's upper half continued crawling toward him, still reaching, still hungry. Fire, he thought desperately. Fire destroys everything. He spotted a box of old matches on the counter, next to a kerosene lamp so ancient he was shocked it hadn't crumbled to dust. Daniel grabbed both, his hands shaking so badly he dropped the first match, the second, the third. A doll latched onto his arm, its teeth sinking into his flesh. He screamed, dropping the matches, and for a moment pure panic overwhelmed him. More dolls were climbing his legs, his torso, their cold porcelain fingers finding purchase in his clothes, his skin, their mouths seeking the lamp. Daniel grabbed the kerosene lamp and smashed it against the floor. Oil splashed across the wooden boards, across the dolls, across his own feet. He didn't care. He snatched up a match and struck it against the box. The flame caught. He dropped the match into the oil. The world became fire. The dolls screamed, a high, keening sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. They released their grip, stumbling backward, burning. Daniel threw himself toward the window, covering his face with his arms as he crashed through the glass. He hit the ground outside and rolled, extinguishing the flames that had caught on his clothes, gasping for air that wasn't choked with smoke. Behind him, the cottage burned. He lay there, watching the fire consume the structure, listening to the screams fade into the crackle of flames. The fog had retreated, and above him he could see stars, wrong stars, constellations that didn't exist, but stars nonetheless. 4 nights, he thought. 4 creatures. What's left of me when this is over? The fire began to dim, and with it, so did Daniel's consciousness. He felt himself slipping away, falling through layers of reality, until he woke in his apartment, the taste of smoke still in his mouth, burns on his forearms that would scar for the rest of his life, however long that might be.
Chapter 5. The Mountain Peak. cold. Cold like nothing he'd ever experienced. Cold that seemed to bypass his skin entirely and settle directly into his bones, his organs, his soul. Daniel's eyes snapped open to a world of white and gray. Snow swirling in a wind that howled like a living thing, jagged rocks jutting up through drifts that reached past his knees, and above it all, a peak that disappeared into clouds that churned with lightning. He was high, impossibly high, standing on a ledge perhaps 3 feet wide, with a sheer drop on one side and a cliff face on the other. The cold was killing him. Already he could feel his fingers and toes going numb, could feel his heart struggling to pump blood that was thickening with each passing moment. He wore nothing but his sleeping clothes, cotton that might as well have been tissue paper against this assault. "Move," he commanded himself, "move or die." He began to climb, following the ledge as it wound around the mountain's face. The wind fought him at every step, trying to pry his fingers from their handholds, trying to sweep his feet out from under him. Snow blinded him, filled his mouth, stole the warmth from his core with every breath. But he climbed, because the alternative was death, and something in Daniel Cole, something that had been forged in jungles and temples and rivers and burning cottages, refused to surrender. The sound reached him through the storm, a deep, rhythmic thudding that seemed to shake the mountain itself. Daniel pressed himself against the cliff face, squinting into the swirling white, trying to identify the source. Something massive moved through the storm above him. The creature emerged from the clouds like a god descending from heaven, if that god was carved from ice and malice and stood perhaps 30 feet tall. Its body was humanoid but wrong, proportions slightly off in ways that made Daniel's brain hurt to process. It was covered in frost, icicles hanging from limbs that ended in claws like curved blades. Its face was a mask of frozen features, eyes glowing with the pale blue of deep glacial ice. The frost giant looked down at him, and it smiled. It moved with speed that something that large shouldn't possess, one massive arm sweeping toward the ledge where Daniel clung. He threw himself backward just as the claws gouged deep furrows in the stone where he'd been standing. Rock fragments peppered his face, drawing blood that froze almost instantly. Can't fight it, can't outrun it, can only outthink it. The ledge widened ahead, opening onto a plateau dotted with ice formations and the remains of what might have been a camp. Tattered fabric whipping in the wind, equipment half buried in snow, and the frozen corpses of climbers who hadn't been as lucky as Daniel hoped to be. He ran for the plateau, the giant's footsteps shaking the ground behind him. Among the camp debris, he spotted what he needed, climbing equipment, including a length of rope and several pitons still hammered into the ice. The giant's hand came down again, and Daniel rolled, the impact sending a shockwave through the plateau that knocked him off his feet. He scrambled up, grabbed the rope, and kept moving. The ice formations rose around him like a frozen forest. He wove between them, using their bulk to block the giant's line of sight. The creature roared like glaciers calving into the sea and began smashing through the formations in pursuit. The edge, Daniel thought, his mind racing. The plateau has an edge. He ran toward the precipice, the giant crashing through ice behind him. The drop was perhaps 100 feet, survivable if he could slow his descent, fatal if he couldn't. But he wasn't planning to jump. At the edge, Daniel stopped and faced the giant. The creature loomed over him, those glacial eyes blazing with triumph. It raised one massive foot, preparing to stamp him into paste. Daniel dropped to his knees and drove the pitons into the ice at his feet. The giant's foot came down. Daniel rolled aside at the last possible moment, and the creature's foot landed on the edge of the plateau, an edge that had been weakened by the placement of the pitons, an edge that couldn't support 40 tons of frozen horror.
The ice cracked, the giant stumbled, and then the edge of the plateau gave way entirely, taking the giant with it. Daniel scrambled backward as the creature fell, its roar of rage echoing up from the abyss until the storm swallowed it entirely. He lay there on the remaining ice, shaking from cold and terror and adrenaline, waiting for the giant to climb back up. It didn't. The storm began to fade, and with it, Daniel's consciousness. He let the cold take him, let the darkness wash over his freezing body, and when he woke in his apartment, he was shivering so violently that it took an hour in a scalding shower before he felt human again. 5 nights, 5 monsters, 5 impossible survivals, and still, Daniel knew there would be more to come.
Chapter 6. The Desert Wasteland. Heat replaced cold like a slap from a forge. Daniel gasped awake to find himself lying face down in sand that burned his exposed skin. The sun, or what passed for a sun in this place, hung directly overhead, a merciless white disk in a sky the color of dried bone. The heat was absolute, inescapable, a physical weight pressing down on him from all directions. He pushed himself up, sand cascading from his clothes, and looked around at a landscape that seemed designed by madness. Dunes stretched to every horizon, their surfaces rippling with heat waves that created false images, cities in the distance, oases, figures that beckoned and vanished. The air smelled of nothing, utterly devoid of any scent, and the silence was so complete that Daniel could hear his own heartbeat like a drum. Water was his first thought. I need water or I'm dead. He began to walk, though he had no idea which direction might lead to salvation. The sand shifted beneath his feet, sometimes supporting his weight, sometimes giving way and sending him sliding down dune faces that seemed to have no bottom. The sun didn't move, it simply hung there, radiating death, indifferent to his suffering. Time became meaningless. Had he been walking for minutes, hours, days? The heat was doing something to his mind, making it hard to think, hard to remember why he was walking at all. The mirage appeared without warning, an oasis, palm tree swaying in a breeze he couldn't feel, a pool of water so blue it made his parched throat ache just to look at it. Daniel knew it wasn't real, he knew it, but his feet carried him toward it anyway, driven by a thirst that had transcended reason. The sand beneath the mirage began to move. It started as a ripple, like the surface of water disturbed by something massive swimming beneath. Then the ripples intensified, spreading outward, and the mirage flickered and died as something ancient and terrible began to rise from its desert grave. The sand spirit emerged in a cascade of granules that seemed to move with intelligence, forming and reforming into a shape that was almost humanoid, but composed entirely of the desert itself. It stood perhaps 12 feet tall, its body constantly shifting, features appearing and disappearing as the sand reshaped itself. Where its eyes should have been, 2 pockets of absolute darkness stared at Daniel with hunger beyond comprehension. It spoke, and its voice was the whisper of sand against stone, the hiss of dunes shifting in eternal wind. "You do not belong here." "I know," Daniel said, his voice cracked and raw. "I don't want to be here. Just let me leave." "You cannot leave." The spirit moved toward him, its body flowing across the sand like a wave. "You can only be consumed." Daniel ran. The spirit followed, but not by walking. It was the desert, and the desert was everywhere. The sand beneath Daniel's feet began to shift, forming into hands that grasped at his ankles, faces that screamed silently up at him, tendrils that tried to wrap around his legs and pull him down. He stumbled, fell, got up, kept running. Behind him, the spirit's laughter was the sound of sandstorms tearing across empty wastes. Ahead, something glinted in the sunlight. Glass.
a field of glass, created perhaps by some ancient lightning strike, its surface smooth and reflective, and utterly wrong in this landscape of endless sand. Daniel made for it, understanding instinctively that the glass might be his only hope. The sand spirit seemed to sense his intent, its pursuit intensified, the desert itself rising up in waves that crashed toward him like a tsunami. He reached the glass field and threw himself onto its surface. The sand spirit hit the glass and stopped. It raged at the edge, its form billowing and reshaping as it tried to extend onto the smooth surface, but it couldn't gain purchase. The glass was immune to its control, solid, unchanging, everything the spirit was not. Daniel crawled deeper into the glass field, putting distance between himself and the thing at its edge. The spirit screamed, a sound of frustration and hunger denied, and he watched as the spirit circled the field like a predator circling a cage, searching for any weakness, any point of entry. Hours passed. The sun didn't move. The spirit didn't leave. But eventually, as all things in these nightmare visions did, reality began to fade. The glass beneath Daniel became soft, then insubstantial, and he fell through it into darkness. He woke in his apartment with sand in every fold of his clothing, sand in his ears and nose and mouth, sand that would take weeks to fully expel. 6 nights, 6 escapes. The patterns were becoming clear now. Every night a new horror, every night a new survival that seemed increasingly impossible, and every morning proof that it was all too real.
Chapter 7: The Abandoned Hospital. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, their buzzing the only sound in a corridor that stretched into infinity. Daniel stood at one end of the hallway, staring at peeling walls the color of old bandages and a floor that was sticky with substances he refused to identify. The smell was overwhelming, disinfectant barely masking something rotten underneath, something that had been dead for a very long time. Gurneys lined the walls, some empty, some covered with sheets that bulged in ways that suggested the occupants weren't entirely human. Medical equipment sat abandoned in doorways, IV stands dripping unknown fluids, heart monitors displaying flat lines, wheelchairs with straps that had been broken from the inside. A hospital, Daniel thought. Of course, every nightmare has to have a hospital. He moved forward, because forward was the only direction that might lead to an exit. The doors on either side of the corridor were mostly closed, but through the small windows he could see fragments of horror. Operating rooms where the surgeries had gone terribly wrong, patient rooms where the patients had become something other than human, a nursery where the bassinets contained things that should never have been born. The lights flickered again, and in the moment of darkness he heard something, a wet, shuffling sound like bare feet on a bloody floor. Daniel froze. The sound came again, closer now, and then a voice, cracked and broken, speaking words that might have been a language, but might have been just madness given form. Patient escaped, must return patient to room, must complete treatment. It emerged from a doorway 3 rooms ahead, a figure in a hospital gown that had once been white but was now stained with every fluid the human body could produce. Its form was human but wrong, limbs that bent backward, a head that sat in an angle no neck could support, fingers that had been replaced with surgical instruments fused directly to the flesh. The mutant patient's face was a nightmare of tumors and surgical scars, one eye blind and weeping pus, while the other tracked Daniel with terrible intelligence. Must return patient, it said, and began to shuffle toward him with increasing speed. Daniel ran in the opposite direction, crashing through double doors into a new wing of the hospital. Here, the lights worked less reliably, casting the corridor in strobing illumination that made it impossible to see clearly. He heard the mutant behind him, its shuffling gait somehow keeping pace despite its ruined body. Light, he remembered from one of his research binges. In horror movies, the monsters always hate light. He spotted a supply closet and ducked inside, hands searching desperately in the darkness. His fingers closed around something cylindrical, a flashlight, its battery weak but still functional. He also found a fire extinguisher, heavy and reassuring. The mutant's shuffling stopped outside the closet door. "No, you're in there," it whispered. "Can smell your fear, so sweet." Daniel held his breath. Through the crack under the door, he could see the mutant's feet, wrong, too many toes, arranged in patterns that made no biological sense as it paced back and forth. Then the door began to open. Daniel burst out, flashlight blazing directly into the mutant's malformed face. The creature shrieked, throwing up its surgical tool hands to block the light. Daniel didn't hesitate. He swung the fire extinguisher with all his strength, connecting with the mutant's skull. The creature went down, but it wasn't dead. It was already stirring, already beginning to rise, and Daniel knew he needed to move now. He ran through the hospital, the flashlight's beam cutting through the darkness ahead of him. More mutants emerged from doorways, patients and doctors and nurses, all transformed into nightmares of flesh and medical equipment. But the light drove them back, made them hesitate just long enough for Daniel to slip past. He found the exit, a door marked with a green sign that might have been the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. He slammed into it, expecting it to be locked, expecting this to be the end. The door opened. Daniel stumbled out into a courtyard filled with rusted ambulances and overgrown weeds, the hospital looming behind him like a monument to suffering. The mutants didn't follow. They clustered at the doorway, their malformed faces pressed against the glass, watching him escape. The world began to fade, and Daniel let it take him, let it carry him back to the waking world, where hospitals were places of healing and the fluorescent lights never flickered. 7 nights, 7 survivals. He wondered, as consciousness slipped away, how many more he could endure before something finally broke.
Chapter 8. The Carnival at Night. The calliope music was the first thing he heard, cheerful and distorted, like a melody played through broken pipes by hands that had never known joy. Daniel opened his eyes to find himself standing at the entrance to a carnival that shouldn't exist. Faded banners proclaimed wonders and amazements, their paint peeling and their promises rotten. Booths lined the midway, their games rigged and their prizes decayed beyond recognition. Ahead, rides loomed against a sky that held no stars, a Ferris wheel that turned on its own, a carousel whose horses had the faces of something not quite equine, a roller coaster that seemed to twist through dimensions rather than space. The fog was thick here, swirling around his ankles like curious cats, carrying that damned music and the smell of cotton candy gone to mold. A carnival, Daniel thought with grim humor. Of course there's a clown. He moved through the midway, past games where the stuffed animals watched him with 2 real eyes, past food stalls where the hot dogs squirmed in their buns, past a fortune teller's booth where the crystal ball showed him nothing but his own terrified face reflected infinitely. The laughter started somewhere behind him. It was a clown's laugh, high and manic and utterly without humor. It echoed off the carnival structures, seeming to come from everywhere at once. Daniel spun, searching for the source, but the fog revealed nothing. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls," the voice came from speakers mounted on poles throughout the carnival, crackling with static and madness. "Welcome to the greatest show on Earth. Tonight's performance features a very special guest." The laugh again, closer now. "Let's give him a round of applause." The fog parted, and Daniel saw it. The clown. It stood perhaps 50 feet away, illuminated by the sickly glow of broken carnival lights. Its outfit was traditional: red nose, painted smile, oversized shoes, but everything was wrong. The smile was carved into its face, revealing too many teeth. The nose pulsed like a beating heart. The shoes left bloody footprints as it walked. In its hands, it held strings, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, extending up into the fog where they connected to something. "Run, run, run," the clown sang, its voice discordant and beautiful. "Run while you can, little man. The show's about to begin, and you're the star attraction." Daniel ran. The carnival became a maze of horrors. Rides activated as he passed, their mechanisms screaming with rust and age, their cars filled with mannequins that turned to watch him go. The games came to life, their operators now visible, things like the clown but smaller, more numerous, their painted faces leering as they reached for him with cotton candy sticky fingers. He ducked into the house of mirrors, hoping to lose his pursuer in the labyrinth of reflections. The mirrors showed him 1,000 Daniels, each one slightly different, thinner, older, more terrified than the last. And in every reflection he could see the clown behind him, getting closer, always closer. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the deadest of them all?" Daniel smashed through the mirrors, ignoring the glass that sliced his hands and arms, ignoring the blood that made everything slippery. He emerged on the other side to find himself in the carnival's theater, a tent of red and white stripes that smelled of sawdust and old blood. The stage was set for a performance. Puppets hung from a rig overhead, their strings extending down to a control mechanism that sat in the center of the stage. And there, waiting for him, was the clown. "Wonderful timing!" it exclaimed, clapping his hands with a sound like meat slapping meat. "The finale needs a star, and you're perfect for the role." He pulled on his strings, and Daniel realized with horror that the puppets weren't puppets at all. They were people, or what remained of people, their bodies pierced and suspended by wires that bit deep into their flesh. They began to dance, their movements jerky and wrong, their mouths opening and closing in silent screams. Daniel's eyes found the control mechanism. The strings all led to it, the clown's strings, the puppet people's strings, everything connected. "Take your place," the clown commanded, and Daniel felt something tug at his limbs, felt strings he couldn't see trying to wind around his wrists and ankles. He grabbed a torch from a bracket on the tent wall, a real torch, burning with real fire, and threw it at the control mechanism. The strings caught instantly. Fire raced along them, reaching up to the puppets and down to the clown. The creature screamed, a sound so inhuman that Daniel's ears felt like they might bleed, and dropped its strings to claw at its burning costume. Daniel ran for the exit as the tent began to collapse, as the clown's screams turned to laughter again, even in death, refusing to stop the show. He burst out into the fog and kept running, past the burning carnival, past the rides that were grinding to a halt, past everything, until the world dissolved around him. 8 nights, 8 escapes, 2 more to go.
Chapter 9. The Submerged Cave. Water, cold, dark, everywhere. Daniel's eyes opened to utter blackness, and for a moment of pure terror, he thought he was blind. Then the faintest glow appeared above him, bioluminescence perhaps, or some other light source that had no business existing in this place. He was underwater. The realization brought with it a surge of panic that nearly made him inhale the liquid pressing against his sealed lips. He was in an underwater cave, completely submerged, with no idea which direction led to air and which led to drowning.
"Don't panic," he told himself, though the words felt hollow against the weight of tons of water pressing down on him. "You've survived worse. You've survived everything." The glow came from above and to his left. He kicked toward it, his lungs already beginning to burn. The cave was narrow here, walls pressing in on either side, formations of rock reaching out like grasping fingers. He squeezed through, ignoring the scrapes and cuts, focused only on reaching the light. He broke the surface in a pocket of trapped air, gasping, treading water in a space no larger than a closet. The bioluminescence came from organisms clinging to the cave ceiling, painting everything in shades of cold blue and green. Daniel caught his breath and assessed his situation. The air pocket was stable but limited. He could see tunnels extending in 3 directions beneath the water's surface, any one of which might lead to escape or might lead deeper into the cave system. Something moved in the water beneath him. He felt it before he saw it, a current against his legs, a displacement of water that suggested something large passing very close. He pulled his legs up, making himself as small as possible, and peered into the depths. The creature emerged from the darkness slowly, as if it had all the time in the world. It was amphibious, clearly, designed for life in these caves, adapted to an existence of eternal darkness. Its body was elongated and serpentine, covered in scales that reflected the bioluminescence in sickening rainbows. Tentacles extended from its head and torso, each one tipped with what might have been mouths or might have been something worse. Its eyes, dozens of them, clustered in patches across its body, were perfectly white, evolved beyond the need for light. It sensed him. He could tell by the way those blind eyes seemed to focus, the way the tentacles began to reach upward towards his air pocket. Daniel dove. The creature shrieked, a sound that traveled through the water as a physical force, slamming into him and disorienting him completely. He tumbled through the water, unable to tell up from down, tentacles brushing against his skin as the creature closed in. His hand found rock, a tunnel entrance, narrow enough that the creature might not be able to follow. He pulled himself into it, kicking desperately as tentacles wrapped around his ankle and pulled. Daniel screamed, losing precious air in a burst of bubbles. He kicked, clawed, fought with everything he had. His fingers found an edge of rock, and he pulled, feeling his skin tear as the tentacle's grip slipped. He shot through the tunnel like a cork from a bottle, the creature's frustrated shriek echoing behind him. The tunnel was too narrow for it, its bulk couldn't fit, and its tentacles could only reach so far. But Daniel's lungs were empty. His vision was going dark at the edges. He could see light ahead, real light, not bioluminescence, but it seemed so far away, impossibly far. "Swim," he commanded himself. "Swim or die." He swam. The light grew brighter, the tunnel opened up, and then he broke the surface, gasping, filling his lungs with air that tasted like life itself. He was in a pool inside a larger cave, this one open to a night sky that held a single, massive moon. Daniel dragged himself onto the rocky shore and lay there, trembling, bleeding, alive. Behind him, from somewhere in the depths, he heard the creature screaming. It was still down there, still hunting, but it couldn't reach him here. 9 nights, 9 creatures, 9 escapes that should have been impossible. 1 night remaining. Daniel closed his eyes and waited for the world to fade, knowing that whatever came next would be the worst of all. The finale was always the worst. Always. Chapter 10. The Haunted Forest. The silence was absolute. No wind, no animals, no distant sounds of civilization, just nothing. A void of sound that pressed against his ears like physical weight. Daniel opened his eyes to find himself standing in a forest, but not a forest as nature intended. The trees here were dead, twisted, blackened things with branches like grasping claws, their bark peeling away to reveal something underneath that looked disturbingly like muscle. A mist clung to the ground, so thick it swallowed his legs up to the knees, concealing whatever lay beneath. This was it, the final nightmare, the conclusion of 10 nights that had nearly destroyed him. "I've survived everything else," Daniel told himself. "I can survive this." But even as he thought it, he knew this place was different. The other visions had been hostile, dangerous, but they had been comprehensible. The jungle was a jungle. The hospital was a hospital. This was something beyond his understanding. He began to walk, because walking was the only thing that made sense. The dead trees seemed to shift in his peripheral vision, their branches reaching for him before snapping back when he turned to look directly. The mist concealed the ground, sometimes solid beneath his feet, sometimes giving way to reveal glimpses of things best not seen. Bones, perhaps, or things that had been bones before being transformed into something else. He walked for what might have been minutes or might have been hours. Time had no meaning here. The forest was endless, unchanging, eternal in its wrongness. And then he saw it. The entity emerged from between 2 trees. Though emerged wasn't quite right, it became, as if reality itself was reshaping to accommodate its presence. It had no fixed form. Instead, it shifted constantly, displaying aspects of every creature Daniel had faced: the shadow beast's burning eyes, the guardian's skeletal face, the river monster's grasping limbs, the doll's porcelain horror, the giant's frozen rage, the sand spirit's ever-shifting form, the mutant's surgical disfigurement, the clown's mad smile, the cave creature's blind hunger. It was all of them. It was none of them. It was something far, far worse. Daniel Cole. The entity's voice was every voice he'd ever heard speaking in terrible unison. "You have survived 9 nights in my domain. I have impressed you." "What are you?" Daniel whispered, though his throat was so dry with terror that the words barely escaped. "I am the space between sleeping and waking. I am the fear that lurks beneath every nightmare. I am the hunter that has pursued humanity since the first dreamer closed their eyes." The entity moved toward him, its form rippling, and Daniel understood with horrible clarity that running would accomplish nothing. This thing was the forest, it was the mist, it was the very air he breathed. "I have fed on many dreamers. Most break by the 3rd night. Some last until the 5th. But you, Daniel Cole, you survived them all. You fought when you should have surrendered. You thought when you should have screamed. You live when you should have died." "What do you want?" Daniel asked. The entity stopped circling, its countless faces aligned, forming something almost cohesive, something that might have been a smile on a being capable of emotion. "I want you to understand what you are now, what you have become." Daniel felt something shift inside him, a clicking like pieces falling into place. He looked at his hands and saw nothing different. They were still his hands, but they felt different. They felt stronger. Every night you absorbed a fragment of my power. Every creature you defeated gave you a piece of itself. You are not merely human anymore, Daniel Cole. You are something between, something capable of walking my realm without being consumed. Why? Daniel demanded. Why put me through all of this? Because I was tired, because I have hunted alone for eons, and I desired a companion, a successor, someone who could understand the beauty of fear, the artistry of terror. The entity extended a limb, if it could be called that, toward Daniel. Within its shifting form, he could see doorways opening to other nightmare realms, other hunting grounds, infinite fields of terror waiting to be explored. Join me, the entity offered. Become what you were always meant to be. Together we will hunt the dreams of the living for all eternity. Daniel looked at the offered limb, looked at the doorways within the entity's form, looked at the dead forest surrounding them both, and he made his choice. No, the word hung in the silent air like a gunshot. The entity's form rippled with what might have been surprise. No, after everything I have given you, after the power you have gained? I didn't ask for any of this, Daniel said, and he was surprised by the strength in his own voice. I didn't ask to be hunted. I didn't ask to be remade, and I don't want to spend eternity causing others to feel what I felt. Fear isn't beautiful. Terror isn't art. They're just pain. They're just suffering, and I refuse to be the source of more. The entity was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice had changed, colder, harder, stripped of any pretense of offering. Then you will die. Not tonight. I cannot kill you now, not after what you have become. But I will find a way, and I will hunt you through every dream for the rest of your pathetic existence. Maybe, Daniel agreed, but I'll be ready. Every night I'll be ready, and every night I'll survive, because that's what I do. That's what I've learned to do. The entity screamed, a sound that shook the dead trees to their roots, that parted the mist and revealed the nightmare landscape beneath. Daniel stood his ground, letting the sound wash over him, refusing to be intimidated. And then the forest began to fade. This is not over, the entity warned, as reality dissolved around them both. It will never be over. I know, Daniel said. I'm counting on it. The darkness took him.
Daniel Cole woke in his bed, morning light streaming through his windows, the distant sounds of traffic filtering up from the street below. He lay there for a long moment, taking inventory of himself. His body was covered in scars now, marks from jungles and temples and burning cottages, from mountain peaks and hospital corridors and underwater caves. But beneath those scars, he felt something else, something new. Strength, awareness, a connection to a realm most people only glimpsed in their worst moments. He rose and walked to his window, looking out at a city waking to another ordinary day. Somewhere out there, people were going about their lives, never knowing what lurked in the spaces between their sleeping and waking hours, never knowing the price Daniel had paid to learn what he had learned. The entity's promise echoed in his mind. It will never be over. Daniel smiled, a small, grim smile that held no joy but a great deal of determination. Good, he said to the empty room. I'd hate to get bored. He turned from the window and began to prepare for his day, knowing that when night fell, the hunt would begin again. The entity would send new horrors, new nightmares, new creatures designed to break him. And every night, Daniel would survive.
because survival wasn't just what he did anymore, it was what he was. Epilogue. 3 months later, Daniel sat in a support group for people with chronic nightmares. He listened to their stories, the terrors they faced each night, the creatures that hunted them through impossible landscapes, the way they woke screaming and wondered if any of it was real. He said nothing about his own experiences, nothing about the power that hummed beneath his skin, nothing about the entity that still hunted him, still tested him, still tried to break what it had inadvertently made stronger. Instead, he offered comfort, offered strategies, offered the hard-won wisdom of someone who had stared into the abyss and found a way to stare back. Because he understood now that the entity hadn't been lying about everything. There was a realm between sleeping and waking. There were things that hunted in the darkness of the human mind. And there were people, ordinary people, frightened people, who needed someone to show them that survival was possible. That was his purpose now. Not to join the entity in eternal hunting, but to oppose it, to help others find the strength he had found, to turn the entity's own creation into its greatest enemy. The support group meeting ended, and Daniel walked out into the night. Above him, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance. Around him, the city pulsed with life and light and all the things that kept the darkness at bay. And in the shadows, just beyond the edge of perception, something watched. It was patient, it was hungry, it would never stop trying. But neither would Daniel. The game had only just begun. The end.